Excuse me, Mr. Master. I was wondering if you would be so kind as to stop destroying Townsville. We like our town very, very much. And we would appreciate if you just leave. Pretty please with sugar lumps on top.
Let us know where you've seen it in the comments down below. But for now, let's get on with the show. Hi guys, welcome to Ask the Camera Guy. My name is Steven. I'm the camera guy. Today we're going to be talking about FPS, frames per second. What are frames per second? Frames per second have to do with how we interpret video. Now, back in the older days, when they found out that putting a couple of progressive images together create the illusion of motion, that's when video was born. In the early days, there was no sound, there was only pictures, all right? That's why they call it the motion picture industry. It's because the pictures move in such a way that you interpret it as motion. Now, the amount of pictures that you see per second are really what we call frames per second. They replace pictures with frames. In the motion picture industry, what they found is 24 frames a second was the sweet spot. It showed you enough motion blur, which is enough blur between things happening. For example, between frame 1, like if I'm like this, and frame 2, there will be significant enough movement, but not too much movement so that it looks jutty, but just enough movement that it will look fluid. 24 frames a second is still the industry standard till today. In today's world, we have digital cameras that don't use that same type of system. In fact, digital cameras use, well, they're digital, right? So they basically capture as much frames as they could program them, as the hardware could sustain. So right now we have video cameras that could do 1,000 frames per second. The phantom cameras can take, somewhere in the region of 10,000 frames per second. And why would you want to do that? Like, why is that even important? It's important because at 1,000 frames per second, you could slow down that motion to see like amazing things happen in our world. At every single frame, if it's 1,000 frames a second, at every single frame, you are in microns of a second movement. You could see somebody blink. You could see like a hummingbird's wings moving gracefully versus it moving, really, really fast. You could see a balloon popping and see the water suspended in air. You could do that because you're capturing so much frames per second that you could literally slow it down and see every micron second of everything that's happening. And that's amazing. Like back in 1924 or 1930, this was impossible. There was nowhere to capture. There was nowhere for a motor to move fast enough and for film to be exposed fast enough to see those minimal movements. Now, how does this work for movies? In movies today, we still are stuck with the 24 frames a second standard. The reason for that is because human beings haven't evolved or changed that much. Yes, our attention spans are smaller. Hey, a monkey! Very much smaller. But in terms of the way that we interpret the world around us, we still see the world more or less comfortably at 24 frames. There are a couple of exceptions to this. For example, the Hobbit movie shot their film at 48 frames a second. And you would wonder, like, why would this be interesting? It was interesting because people found the emotion in the Hobbit to be a little jarring. Like, they found it to be just a little bit too crisp, for our liking. And you would think that it might not make such a big difference. I mean, the difference between 24 and 48 frames should be minimal. But, I mean, we notice. Now, there are a couple of other exceptions. For example, when doing stop motion video, they usually basically take a picture and then they take many pictures, making small movements to the clay motion figurines that they have on set. And they make small little adjustments and they take one picture. And then they play it back. At a certain amount of frames per second. A certain amount of frames is about 12. All right? So 12 frames per second is the standard for clear motion or stop motion video. News is another exception. News, does not use the 24 frames per second standard. News tries to go for more crisp realism and not that dreamy, creamy motion blur that you get between images in a movie. So they wanted to separate themselves from having that same illusion element and try to go more for realism. So you find that when you look at CNN or any of those other news broadcasting sites, what you see as video looks very different to what you see in a movie. I mean, in the future, we're probably going to be shooting way faster frame rate. Even on TV, like sports, they tape sports at about 120 frames per second. And again, it's to give you that hyper-realistic vibe. It feels real. It doesn't feel like a movie. So guys, that was our show about frames per second. I hope that you learned something. I hope that it's not something that you're probably going to put on your iPhone. But if you're using your iPhone and you want to create cool effects or do cool stuff, then at least you know what's happening when you do your super slow-mo or that super slow-mo effect that you have on some of these phones. What they do is just to pump up the frame rate so that you can slow it down later and you have more frames to keep a 24 frames per second end result, even though you're shooting at like 100 frames a second. Guys, thanks so much for watching this show. My name is Steven, I'm the camera guy, and if you like the show, press like, subscribe, share. You can click the little bell thing that's around this place. You can click the bell and you'll get a little bit of notifications, some notifications whenever we bring out new episodes. And if you have any questions whatsoever for me, you can put them in the comments. If you have a movie that you particularly liked and you use some really cool frames, you could drop that in the comments as well. And remember, peace, no gang signs. Secret confession, baby wipes are great for adults too.